And here we are, back home in Canada, having traveled and done this amazing trip. And the first part of the video, as you saw, we started in Tanzania. We'll continue with the second part, and I will explain the journey that I undertook and the system I used and how we got through those days. Um, to start off, I might just give a little bit of a background. This trip was conceived almost a year before actually happening. It was during a sabbatical from work, and I connected with a friend that said she would do it with me. We met in England and began to plan the journey. The first aspect of this was just having the time off and finding somebody to do it with and deciding how we wanted to do it. And we were pretty clear that given that I was an amateur at least, my friend was more experienced, but I was an amateur. So we had to consider that in our planning. And what we ended up doing was deciding that we would do a customized schedule with a private expedition. The way it works in Tanzania is that you cannot do these trips on your own. You do need a guide and a group to take you up the mountain um, with porters and cooks and all kinds of assistance and help. And that's just the way they do it to create um, employment for these porters and individuals who take people up, but also because of safety. These mountains are in Africa, and there's a bunch of elements to think about. And so it's both for the safety of the travelers as well as creating employment for the porters. The government there has mandated that these trips should be done with um, local experts. And as a result of that, there are now many companies that organize these trips for you and find the porters and guides, and different companies will provide different packages as to how this is done. We were very lucky in that through our network, having actually grown up in East Africa, through our network of friends and connections, we were able to find a group that did a custom package, that did a private tour, and asked us what we wanted and how we wanted to do it, and they were able to accommodate. So this company is known as Bootstrap Adventures, and the way it works is that all these companies and operators will then subcontract the trip to guides and porters that may have attachments to a different company in the Kilimanjaro area. It's actually interesting how you would, for example, book with company A, but the porters and guides that company A uses are normally assigned to company B, so the company A and company B are likely talking to each other to share some of the resources and subcontract some of the drivers and guides and porters. And it's a big business down there, and we appreciate that as long as they provide the services that we wanted. So we requested the cooks and the porters and the assistant porters and guides, and it was an entire team that was put together for us, and we were just two people. I mean, there were groups where there were 10 or 12 travelers together, and the staff was less than what we had in this complement. We had two guides just for the two of us. We had seen groups where there were two guides for a lot more people, and less porters and less staff. So as you can see, our team here is quite large, and that was the selling point for us, is that number one, we had a company that provided a personal package, and then the complement of uh, providers and porters and guides and cooks and somebody to help with the portable toilet that we requested. That was quite important for us, at least. And partly the reason we submitted was because we had lots of help, because at different points we had difficulty with our bags and things like that. And we had enough assistants and assistant porters and assistant guides, as you'll see, that that came to help us and gave us that extra support uh, that we needed. An excessive amount of training is by no means required for this trip, but being a little active leading up to the trip is definitely a good idea. For me, it was a lot of time on the treadmill, as well as an exercise bike, which I bought, and I made a point of doing one or the other for at least an hour, at least 5 days a week. I did a lot of jogging just in my neighborhood, and a lot of walking, a lot of walking around my area, around my house, at least getting the 10,000 steps every day. For me, that was enough. I didn't do any excessive workouts at the gym or a mountain climber or anything like that. Most times I was on my exercise bike back here and my treadmill just leading up to the trip. And again, it wasn't substantial. It wasn't done for weight loss or anything like that. I didn't lose any weight at all. It was just to get the muscles active enough to not start cramping on the trip, to have some endurance for the trip. So making sure that if you're going on a treadmill, setting a time of an hour and a half, that you actually do an hour and a half. The exercise bike, if you set 40K or 50K on the exercise bike, then making sure that you have the endurance to actually do that, not that you then give up halfway along. So that was how I did my training, and I think physically it wasn't that challenging. Certain areas maybe were, but there were sections that were going to be challenging either way, and it wasn't because of physical fitness. It was more because of the terrain and the elements. Sometimes the rain, sometimes the cold, sometimes the snow, sometimes the ice. So having good gear and having good shoes and having good equipment and using the hiking poles and having a few warm jacket options and having a good windbreaker, a couple of hoodies, just being prepared for the elements, I think was a bigger um, part of the trip and the experience than the actual physical part of the journey. Because the physical part I felt was basically doing those simple exercises, walking, jogging, biking, developing that endurance more than anything else helped prepare for the journey. And the rest of it was just making sure that you were prepared mentally for what was going to happen and that you had the right gear for that trip. That was all the preparation that I did. So, when you arrive for Kilimanjaro, you actually arrive in a town called Moshi. You land at the Kilimanjaro International Airport, which is between Moshi and Arusha. But Moshi is at the foot of Kilimanjaro, so Kilimanjaro is closer to the town of Moshi. And you are taken to a lodge. Your company will arrange for you to be picked up at the airport. Again, there's a few forms to fill out, and of course, getting the Tanzania entrance arrival. As you leave the airport, there's a cafeteria just across. Great place to grab a little coffee, a little cappuccino. They make great smoothies. We had the 10-day smoothie. 10-day means dates. They make a beautiful smoothie out of dates. There's also a currency exchange right in the airport, and some people got their SIM cards there. The company that is at the airport, I don't remember what it's called, but it's not the one that most people recommend if you're going on to Kilimanjaro. The company that's most recommended in terms of cell coverage is Tigo. So the Tigo office is in Moshi, and certainly recommend getting the Tigo SIM card because that's the one that worked the best on the mountain with cell coverage. So definitely currency exchange, grab a coffee, meet your driver. They will drive you to the lodge from where you will begin your journey to the mountain. The lodge will most likely be in Moshi. In the town of Moshi, there's also a number of operators that will sell any sort of equipment that you might not have brought. So for me, I didn't bring my duffel bag. I had multiple other things planned, and so I wanted to carry my two suitcases through the different airports. I was going to have other stops on the way to Tanzania and on the way back. So I actually got my duffel bag from an operator in Moshi that sold a few other things as well. They gave me a hot water bottle to put inside my sleeping bag for 10 US dollars. The duffel bag was $35 and it was returnable. I also could not find a good camelback setup here in Canada, so I ended up getting one in Moshi, which was really nice. It was a platypus and it was great. The duffel bag they gave me was a North Face. It was a 90 liter and it was more than enough to carry all my supplies. They gave me a nice hot water bottle and a couple of little things that we could not find. So there are a number of people in Moshi that operate small businesses that provide anything that you might not have brought. They also had down jackets for people that didn't remember to get one. They had socks, they had gloves, all kinds of stuff was available from this operator, and I will put their contact in my comment section if you don't get the material you need or can't bring what you need, or if your luggage gets lost, then these people will definitely be able to provide that. So once you're at the lodge, certainly they will explain to you what's going to happen, what meals are covered. If you want to go out into Moshi town, there's great cafes there. There's a few supermarkets. There's a fruit market. They'll call you a scooter taxi. They're called boda bodas, and they'll take you wherever you want if you want to go out into town. But essentially, once you reach the lodge, you're on your own time till the expedition starts, which is usually first thing the next day. So we were actually able to get a good little meal at the lodge, and what we had is called chips mayai. It's a traditional African omelet with potatoes, with a smoothie, of course. It was great. It was very local, and something I haven't eaten in many years. As I said, I have grown up in Africa. It was good to be back and try all these traditional foods. So the lodge we stayed at was called Chania Lodge, and we met many people who were there to do Kilimanjaro. I started meeting climbers actually in Doha, where my transfer was, and I was a little bit intimidated because many of them were very skilled. Looked like they had done many mountains. Looked like people who were in way better shape than I was, and it was a little bit intimidating to see all these strong built people in good shape, in good physical shape, beginning their journey while here I was an amateur. I'll share a few pictures of Chania Lodge. As you can see, it was a great place to start the journey. If you do have a choice in the lodge that you begin your expedition, I highly recommend Chania Lodge as one of those places. Um, then you do get the rest of the time to get things organized, decide what you want to leave at the lodge. The lodges are very safe to leave any personal items. They do recommend that you keep your passport and your money with you, but you can leave everything else at the lodge. In fact, if you have any electronics that don't come with you, a laptop, whatever you want, I left all that stuff at the lodge, and I also hid some money in my suitcase because it was going to be locked up. I only took about 200 US dollars with me on the mountain. I did keep my passport on me, and I had an iPad mini which I kept with me. Um, the rest of the gear I used was stuff that I would need on the mountain, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So around dinner time on that first night, you meet your guides. Sometimes there's assistant guides. We had been assigned actually two senior guides, and then along with them were two junior guides, along with the rest of the crew. So there were actually four guides on our journey. Along with that, we were assigned about eight porters, a cook, a helper to the cook, and a bathroom attendant because we had requested a private bathroom, and that came at an extra cost of about $200, which was about $100 each because there's only two of us, and that was the best $200 I spent out of everything else. But coming back to the guides, they met us around supper time. We had some drinks. We went through all the maps. They brought a few books showing us the journey. The other beautiful experience we had was we started speaking to our guides in Swahili, or Kiswahili, which is the actual name of the language. We had learned Swahili or Kiswahili in high school, and my friend and I, who were both from Africa, we both wanted to try it out. And as the days went by, we started getting more and more fluent in Kiswahili and learning the language. And it was quite amazing. By the end of the trip, my wife joined later on, and she was like, "You're pretty fluent now," and I was pretty happy that that happened, and the language came back very fast. So we were introduced to the guides, the assistant guides, but the rest of the crew we didn't quite meet till the next day. They went over the whole trip. They looked over our gear. They did suggest leaving a few things behind because, like everybody else from North America, Europe, we bring a lot of stuff. They kind of reassured us that we didn't need all that stuff, and so we kind of left a few things behind. Along the way, you'll see the pictures of what actually we did use, and even what we took was a little too much because there was stuff that didn't get used at all. So they do encourage us to get to bed early, to not have a late night. There were other groups where people were out drinking and having fun late into the night. We listened to our guides, and that was something we did throughout the journey. Is we listened to our guides, and we did exactly what they said. And they told us to have an early night, and that's exactly what we did. I packed up what I didn't need, told the front desk what I'd be leaving behind, what I'd be taking with me, and they were quite good with locking up whatever I was not going to take. The other thing that happened in the evening, we started to meet people that had come back, and just looking at them was a little bit deflating because they looked so tired and so worn down. This one guy from Germany that I was talking to at the lodge who had just completed the trip, he had really bad sunburns. He was all red. He had bruises on his legs. He did summit, but in his little bit of English was able to explain to me that it's so important to have that sunscreen with you. It's so important to go slow, watch out for injuries, have some anti-inflammatories, because he said it was just so rough and so challenging for him. And the elements you really can't predict. Once they were at the summit, they got really, really blaring sun on their skin, their lips chapped. So lip chap's important. And that sunscreen, I can't emphasize how important it is. Thankfully, I had all that stuff, and it was very useful. Just remembering to take it with me after meeting this individual. So usually at that point you're exhausted from your trip and from your drive from Moshi to the lodge, which took us an hour and a half. We had to stop at the Tigo office in Moshi. For the Tigo office, remember that you will need a local guarantor for a SIM card in Tanzania. So make sure your company has informed your driver that they may have to act as a guarantor for you to get a local SIM card. They need your passport, they'll take a picture. And then your guarantor who would be your driver or maybe even your guide, if they know who your guide is, but make sure that you speak to your company and they're aware that you'll be buying a Tigo card. The one that's sold at the airport, I think, is Vodacom. I think that was very easy to obtain. We did meet a few people at the airport who we later on met on the mountain, including this amazing guy John, who was with us throughout the journey. And we met him at the airport. He had lost his friend and couldn't communicate with the Tanzanians. Speaking Swahili was such an asset for me because I was able to help John. And then we became friends and we kind of hung out throughout the expedition. It turned out that he was also with another operator that our company had used some of their resources. So these companies all help each other out. So if you're with one operator, they might use resources from a different operator. They all work together to give their clients the best experience. And that was one amazing thing about Tanzania is that the different operators actually get along with each other. We became very good friends with the guides that were helping out with an expedition from uh, America, from the United States, and they were with Ultimate Kilimanjaro UK, as it's called. This is another great tour operator, and they were climbing at our pace, and we were helping each other out, and our guides were getting some advice from their guides. So it's not at all. The competition between the different operators. I've been to Egypt and I've been to Turkey and other places where tour operators are trying to steal each other's clients. Whereas in Tanzania, the tour operators actually work together and a lot of the guides know each other and get advice from each other. And you'll see that also in safaris where, you go on a safari and your guide will be speaking to another guide over the radio, and asking them where they would go to see the animals that their clients want to see. So this is an amazing part of Tanzania is that the operators don't compete with each other. They're all there to help each other. They give each other food. They exchange information. They introduce the clients to each other, and they actually encourage some camaraderie between the different climbers. So that was great to see as well. We got a good night's sleep that night. We were informed to wake up early to be ready for the departure. And so after breakfast, we got ready to go, and they were there to pick us right on time. Once again, we went through the equipment and we made sure we were carrying exactly what we were going to need and no extra material with us. We checked our medications to make sure we had all our meds. We also checked our photography equipment, and we checked our electronics, money, and passport, our jackets, all our clothes. They made us go through our bags again to make sure we weren't forgetting anything. We then made sure that everything that we were leaving behind was locked up properly, and then we went to the bus. When we went into the bus, of course, we had the rest of the crew there. So we met the porters and some of the other people. There were quite a few people on the expedition, even though we were only two clients. The company put together quite a lot of manpower to help us get to the top. We then had a pretty decent drive. I'm just looking through the pictures. Some of them I'll throw in there, through some very rural areas and roads out of Moshi and to Kilimanjaro. We passed through some towns and villages and coffee plantations. We stopped at a supermarket to get some snacks, and to get some water. Um, we took some pictures along the way. We saw some villages, and then we arrived at the starting point. Now, when we arrived at the starting point, there were some official procedures that needed to be done. The guides took care of all that for us. So they took us to a little cafe where we had some drinks. We got some food, which was which was paid for by the company. And so we waited there while they did their official work. And then they took us to a lodge with some rangers to complete some more paperwork, identify who we were, submit some information. Again, we had to submit our passport numbers and all that. And then following that, after we had a bit of a bathroom break, since we had a lot to drink at that point, we went through security. So security to begin the climb is very thorough. They will weigh the duffel bag that you're taking with you, and it has to be 15 kilos. And they also make sure that your porters are not carrying a lot of weight. So the porters' bags are checked as well and weighed. They made sure that we didn't carry any forbidden things, especially drones are not allowed on Mount Kilimanjaro. They checked our camera, so security can take quite a while. After that, we began the first part of the trip, which was through the tropical rainforest. And so, before you knew it, we were on our journey to the top. And we started with a very smooth trek through some tropical forest. Um, the tropical forest makes it look easy because you start with pretty much a hike that you would probably have experienced in Europe and North America, through trees and through some very beautiful forest, looking at some tropical flora, um, some birds and little animals around. Nothing big on Kilimanjaro. Kilimanjaro does not have wild animals or anything like that. Sometimes you might see a deer or a fox or a squirrel or a lynx or something like that, but definitely no wild animals to be worried about. The other mountain, Mount Meru, which is the sister of Kilimanjaro and is more towards the Arusha side. Some people do Meru before they do Kilimanjaro. Mount Meru does go through some conservation areas, through some national parks that have wild animals. The Kilimanjaro park doesn't. So we didn't really have to worry about that. Through the tropical rainforest, it does rain. So we made sure that for this part of the trip, we had our raincoats. Um, For this part of the trip, all that we carried in our day packs, I had a 30-liter day pack from Osprey, which was more than enough for the day trips because everything else is carried by the porters. For this part of the trip, all you need is a raincoat, a couple of snacks. Typically, for each trip, we would probably eat 2 or 3 granola bars and maybe a little bit of candy. You have your water bottle, as well as your platypus, which is your camelback. That's more than enough water you need for each day's expedition. And of course, something for your head, like a cap or a hat. Or I had a baseball cap for the first few days, and then I had uh, um, a bucket hat. But honestly, I didn't need both. I could have gotten by just with a baseball cap, because at the end you're going to wear your toque as it gets colder. And you may have a hoodie at that point. For the first part, basically, for your clothing. On that day, all I had was track pants, or joggers would be fine, and a t-shirt. You would have your rain jacket, which can double up in case it gets a little bit cool or you feel like it's windy, can act as a windbreaker. I actually had a light hoodie as well as a raincoat, but I certainly didn't need that. If I had a rain jacket that would double up as a windbreaker, that would have been fine. And that's all you need for the first day. We were doing the Machame route, so you begin at the Machame gate, and then you hike through the tropical rainforest until the first camp, which is the Machame camp. Um, it does get a little steep sometimes, and even through the tropical rainforest, there were sections that were a little more challenging just because of the climbing we had to do over some rocks and steeper landscape. But for the most part, this was just a hike through a forest. It took about 4 hours, and it did rain. I'm just looking at the pictures now to make sure I narrate everything that happened on the first day. We had to put our rain jackets on for a little bit. We did see some amazing trees and um, forested areas. You'll see a lot of unique flowers that only are found on Kilimanjaro, and one of them is the Kilimanjaro Passion. Um, for the main journey, you're just with your guides, and they guide you along the path to the Mashami camp. You have to be a little bit careful on the tropical rainforest section of the hike, because there are some pretty nasty bugs. There could be mosquitoes in this area. There's also some very fierce ants that we ran into. So make sure we always carry bug spray, that we're wearing long pants, and that we're not walking into areas that are very bug infested as well, and the guides will tell you that. Other than that, it was very straightforward, not challenging at all. And before you know it, we arrived at the Mashami camp, which is your first camp. At the camp, you will meet your other crew that will somehow be there ahead of you. Um, they are experts. They've done this many, many times, and so this happened every day. We would get to the camp, and the rest of the crew would be there already. Sometimes they take the same route you do and just fire ahead of you. Sometimes they have different ways of getting there faster that are more treacherous, but not treacherous for them. Um, and in fact, by the time you get to the camp, most times our tents were ready for us, and our snacks were good to go. So, right upon arrival at the Mashame camp, which is at an elevation of 2835, we took our camp picture, and then we went straight to our tents. The bathroom was already set up by the porters that were looking after the bathroom. Um, and usually, once you get to camp, you'll change into your camp gear. So for the camp gear, I had a pair of Skechers that I wore at the camp, and I had set aside a separate set of joggers and a fleece hoodie that I would wear at the camp because the camps get pretty cold, and I would sleep in that gear as well overnight. Um, we would after arriving at the camp, normally you would get some sort of coffee, tea, sandwich, and then sometimes popcorn. Like in this case, we got some popcorn, and then you're free to do whatever you want. And typically, this is when you try to meet everybody else. Sometimes other um, groups, other expeditions, other operators are also camping at those camp stops, and so you meet other people. You get some time to talk to your guides, to the rest of the porters. Knowing Swahili was an asset because you could communicate with the other people, with the other porters. So essentially, once you get to camp, you're basically done for the day, and you spend the rest of the afternoon or evening relaxing until dinner is served, washing up. They give you what they call washi washi, which is basically warm water and a little bit of soap. There's no showers on the Machame route. So basically, you use the hot water to do what's called washi washi, and then wash up. They give you a time for dinner, which in our case was around 7 p.m. And then after dinner, there's a daily health check. So during the health check, the guides will come in, measure the oxygen saturation, heart rate, ask you about a bunch of symptoms, and tell you about the next day and how challenging it will be. They then encourage you to go to bed. Um, what I did at this time is again every night rearrange my gear, make sure I had everything, took my medications. So, on that note, maybe I'll just segue into the medications here. So, um, for the preparation of the journey, I did get some supplements, and just from my own research, I started taking magnesium regularly before my trip. I also took lysine, which is a protein that apparently helps build more muscle, and magnesium helps with preventing cramps and helps smooth muscles work better, along with helping endurance development. And I also regularly started using fiber just to keep my bowels working a little more predictably, anticipating the journey where you may not always have access to the bathroom. And these supplements I thought were really, really useful in getting my system working well for the journey. Maybe it was a placebo effect. I don't know. Being a doctor, I kind of felt that, maybe there was no evidence for these things, but at the end of the day, it did work for me, and these supplements were useful. I continued taking these supplements during the trip as well. And I did routinely use ibuprofen just for the usual aches and pains. At the first symptom of anything hurting, I just popped an ibuprofen and it seemed to help. For sleeping, I took melatonin. And I don't recommend taking any other sleeping medications because they're not recommended. Your body's adjusting the respiratory physiology based on the altitude and the lower oxygen concentration. Sleeping medications can alter your body's compensation for the altitude changes and the oxygenation. Um, changes that are occurring in your body. So it's complicated physiology. I wouldn't get into it here, but taking a sleeping medication can be harmful for what the body's trying to do, and the physiological compensations that are going on. Melatonin does not affect that. So I took melatonin for sleeping, and it worked fine. I was popping ibuprofen regularly, and those three supplements I took were very useful as well. Um, they do recommend on many forums taking a beet juice, and so I'm going to share this little picture of a beet juice that I took leading up to the expedition, and it's supposed to increase your body's ability to hold on to oxygen. Again, people laugh at me because as a doctor, I should be supporting evidence-based medicine. These are all supplements that mountaineers recommend. And so, I took it. What the evidence is, I don't know. It seemed to work for me at the very least. There was no harm done from this. With respect to Diamox, I started taking Diamox once we got to this third day. My guides said to start it earlier. I didn't. Once we got to the third day, I started taking, probably the second day as well. At the end of the second day, I started Diamox. I did not take the full dose. That's 250 milligrams twice a day. I stayed with the half dose, 125 milligrams twice a day, and it seemed to work for me. Remember, Diamox will give you numbness on your face, numbness on your fingers, might make your urine look a little weird. That's normal. That happens with Diamox. You're not having a stroke. If your face starts going numb, your lips start going numb, it's not mountain sickness. It's not hypothermia. That's the Diamox doing that. The other thing that you might want to take if you're taking Diamox is a little potassium supplement. So I actually didn't take that because I had electrolyte solutions that I was taking regularly, and they do have an extra amount of potassium within the electrolyte solutions. The commonly mentioned electrolyte supplement is the Noom tablets. So you just pop that into your water, and you're going to get a lot of extra sodium, potassium, electrolytes. Remember, Noom has caffeine, so take it in the morning, not at night. Otherwise, you'll not be able to sleep. But there are other supplements like BioSteel was the other one I had with me that I'd pop into my water at night. And in the daytime, I would take the Noom tablet with my water. There are two main supplies of water that you carry with you. One's your Camelback. I made sure my Camelback was plain water, and they'll encourage you to drink about 3 liters of water a day. So you have 2 liters in your Camelback and maybe 1 liter in your water bottle. It's in my water bottle that I put in the electrolyte tablet, the Noom tablet every day. But my Camelback, I made sure was just plain water. And that's how we use these different supplements. So you spend the night after dinner reorganizing your gear, because when you wake up in the morning, it's going to be go, go, go. They want to take the tents down. They want to clean up the campground. The rangers will start harassing them to get out so that they can clean up the campsite for the newer people that will arrive from expeditions that are behind you. Check your cameras, check your equipment. When it came to cameras, I had my SLR as well as a small camera. I did not use my SLR because it was very heavy, and the porters end up taking anything that's heavy away from you, so you're not carrying heavy stuff. You're only carrying your day pack, and the porters will disappear. So they would take my camera, and I would not be able to find them because they go sometimes a different way, or sometimes they'll go ahead of you. So when you um, start the journey, make sure that you have a small camera with you. Don't take your big SLR, and find a lens that is very versatile for don't take multiple lenses, just one lens. To be honest with you, most of my shots were taken on my cell phone, which was with me all the time. So if you have a good phone, I have the iPhone 15. If you have a good phone, you don't even need the camera. Save your cameras for your safaris. But for the mountain, your phone is good enough. If you're a photographer like me, then you may want to have an SLR. Go with a small one. I took my Sony Alpha 7. It was too big. And most of the time, the porters and the guides don't want you carrying heavy stuff. So it's just going to get taken away from you if you're having issues with carrying weight. A small camera that pops into your day pack would be so much more better, and you'll actually use it. Carry a light lens that maybe goes, you know, from 20 to 50. A 20 to 50 lens would be fine. For everything else, your phone is your main resource. So again, after the first night, you try and get good. You will sleep well on the mountains. I didn't hear of anyone that didn't sleep well. The mountain air, the cooler environment, the exhaustion. You sleep well, and then you're woken up around 6 the next day. They want you up at 6. Again, do a washy. You get your warm water for washy, go to the bathroom, whatever. Breakfast is served at 7, and they want you ready to go at 8. So right after breakfast, we begin the next day. So the second day on the Machame route takes you through to the Shira Cave Camp. That would be your next stop. And this is when you start seeing the mountain. You start seeing the summit. So Kilimanjaro, as you know, has three peaks. Shira, which is where you'll end up on the second day, Kibo and Moenzi. But you start to see Kibo now, and it's beautiful when you first see it. Of course, you don't believe that you'll ultimately be there at the top. It's hard to imagine when you're right at the bottom. But as they say, and the guides will tell you, pole pole, go slowly, and you will get to the top. So the second day takes you on a different terrain. So the tropical rainforest is over. You now go through some moorland, and the vegetation changes. And the second day that takes you to the Shira cave camp does get a little bit challenging. It is very rocky. There's a lot of steep portions through some very challenging rock formations. So for an amateur like me, that was quite challenging. But as long as you go slow, take plenty of breaks, and listen to your guides. They'll tell you when to take a break. They'll tell you when to plow through, when to keep moving. They'll monitor your abilities very closely. They'll see how you're feeling. Listen to the guides. People that got into trouble were people that were trying to do it too quickly. So the guides will make sure you get your breaks. On the way to the Shira Cave Camp, you get a beautiful view of the sister mountain of Kilimanjaro. That's Mount Meru. And we were able to take some amazing pictures of Mount Meru. On this second day, you start seeing clouds at the same level that you are, which is quite an experience to be sitting with the clouds or behind the clouds. Um, and the rock formation can be quite challenging, as we say. But you keep going, and we experienced some interesting landscapes. We saw lots of clouds, as I mentioned. It starts getting a little bit cooler, but not too cold. So for the second day, I wore joggers as well. track pant joggers. That was more than sufficient. And I had a long sleeve hiking shirt, as well as a windbreaker. That's all I needed. I still had my raincoat, but I didn't need that. On the second day, it didn't rain. It didn't get too cold, so my windbreaker was sufficient. I did end up removing it, and I just hiked in my joggers and um, my hiking shirt. I had a cap on just cause. And That's all I needed. In terms of my shoes, I had the Merrell hiking shoes that I'll throw in a picture here. I use that every day. Some people had joggers for the first few days or trail runners for the first few days. I just hiked in my hiking boots for the whole journey. We saw some interesting vegetation that's unique to Kilimanjaro and some very unique rock formations. Just throw some pictures on there. And We took frequent breaks. And what happened on the second day is that the guides we were with called for the assistant guides to come down because we were having a little bit of difficulty with some of the rocks. And so we ended up having four guides that helped through the last bit. What happened was that the um, the rest of the crew reached the camp very early, and so our guides radioed for the assistant guides to come up to receive us. And according to the data I have here, we arrived at Shira Cave Camp at 2:37 p.m. We had left the Machame camp at 8:30, so 6 hours later, we are at the Shira Cave Camp. And it is at the Shira Cave Camp that you see great views of Shira, which is the smallest peak of Kilimanjaro. And again, once you reach the camp, you're free. So you're free for hours, actually. So this is your second day is probably when you'll be getting to camp the earliest. So we had a lot of time actually to take pictures, catch a nap, meet the rest of the crew. We got a great lunch. And then we had the crew put together a little show for us. So they all talked about themselves. They did a little dance. They did a little um, uh, show for us before, after lunch and before dinner. So that was great. We also saw amazing views of Shira, which I'll throw on there. And again, we were now pretty much the same level as the clouds. That was an interesting evening. There were some birds that were unique to Kilimanjaro as well. And I'm just looking through the pictures at the Shira Cave Camp on the second day of our expedition. For the evening, it was pretty much the same every evening. We would get dinner, we would get our health checks, and then we would be ready for the next day. They would tell us a little bit about the next day, and then we would head off to bed. Um, we woke up the next morning pretty early, and then began our third day now to the Lava Tower. So this was an interesting hike. It was pretty easy the third day until the lava tower. So the lava tower is a rock formation on the way to the summit. It's a designated stopping area. Some people do camp at the lava tower. Um, it's a volcanic formation that's left over from the time when Kilimanjaro was a volcano. It's composed of volcanic remnants, and it's a beautiful rock formation, which is a great stop. So that was where we actually stopped, and it did take us a few hours to get there. So we got there. We typically started around 8 in the morning, 8:30. We were at the lava tower by 1:30 p.m. And that gives you more than enough time to admire this rock formation. Um, People were asking if anyone actually climbs the lava tower, but I'm not sure that anybody that I saw was going to be able to climb that. We grabbed lunch there. It was a packed lunch, and it was very, very windy, is what I remember. And it was actually starting to get a little bit cold. So I had my windbreaker on. Um, we were hanging out at the lava tower for quite some time. And then we decided to go on to the next camp, which is known as the Barranco camp. So we left the lava tower, heading off to the Barranco camp, which is a 3-hour hike from the lava tower. Um, that hike was more challenging. The afternoon hike on that third day was quite challenging. It is through some very steep rock formations to get to the Barranco camp, and the vegetation changes now to more of what's known as a moorland vegetation. Again, we got to Barranco camp. Um, Around 4:30 p.m. and that gave us enough time to get ready for dinner. And again, the routine's the same in the evenings. We have enough time to take pictures. At the Barranco camp, once the clouds cleared, we had a beautiful view of the summit, which is where we were headed at the end of the expedition. Again, there's lots of tea, coffee, snacks, just waiting for dinner. Lots of time to take pictures. We wait for the summit to come into view and then grab some pictures. And by now, we are starting to see things getting pretty cold in the evenings. So it's good to have your gear for the last few days easily available, because now you will need it. You will need a jacket in the evenings. I actually had a designated jacket I would wear in the camps for the evenings when it got cold, along with my fleece top. And I had several thermal layers as well that I had bought at Primark in the United Kingdom that I would throw on if it got super cold. I had 3 pairs of thermal tops and bottoms. One of them was very useful for summit night because it was fleece. The other two I wore sporadically. I did interchange my clothes a lot. The only thing I did not wear again were my underwears. And I tried to have a different pair of socks for each day. When it came to socks, until summit night, I was just using hiking socks. But for summit night, I did use a thicker pair of mountain socks. And I had 2 layers of socks for summit night. The rest of the time, I did interchange my garments. Um, and I'll talk a little bit about that, what I used for summit night when we get there. Um, at the Barranco camp, we actually slept very well. And again, we were very tired. We made sure we were ready for the next day. And again, the same routine for the next day. When we left Barranco camp, just looking at the pictures here, reminding myself of that fourth day and how it was. So the fourth day was when you leave Barranco camp and head over to the Karanga camp. Again, this was um, also very challenging. Um, getting to the Karanga camp, you're now going to be going through what's called the Alpine Desert. There's very little vegetation there. And so you're hiking through essentially very bare landscapes. Again, beautiful landscapes. You start seeing some unique vegetation. The Barranco camp to the Karanga camp, it can be steep at times. Even for me as an amateur, it's totally doable. And this is when I put my windbreaker away and I took out my warmer Helly Hansen jacket. At this point, you need something warmer. So I had used my windbreaker until now, but at this point, I needed something more than that, and so I had my warmer jacket for those days. Now, when you leave Barranco camp, you do go through what's called the Barranco Wall. The Barranco Wall intimidates many people because it's a section of rock that's essentially a wall that you have to hike through. I remember it only as a blur now because it was one of those things that you just get done. I don't even have a lot of pictures of the Barranco Wall and when we went through it because we were advised by our guides to be focused on our safety, listening to instructions, looking at where people were heading, keeping our gaze on forwards and not looking backwards. It's a high wall of rock that you have to climb through with some very narrow sections to walk past. Many people will have seen the picture of the hugging rock on Barranco Wall, where you actually have to hug a rock and kind of hug your way around it to get through a very narrow section along the Barranco Wall. Honestly, all I remember was listening to my guides, doing as they said, and navigating that wall. I don't remember it as being terribly difficult. It was a little bit scary, but your guides are always with you. And as long as you listen to the instructions, you get to the top. We got to the top, and that's when we looked down at the Barranco Wall, and we were like, oh my God, we just did the Barranco Wall. And again, we don't have a lot of pictures because that was not the goal. And one thing I will say here is that I felt like I should have taken more pictures. And many people ask for pictures of the Barranco Wall. Many people ask for more pictures of the summit. But honestly, you're not in that frame of mind because your focus is just getting to the end and keeping safe and keeping healthy and listening to the signals that your body's sending you, taking the breaks, talking to the guides, talking to other people, meeting other people and discussing their experience. So really your mind is not focused on capturing a lot of the journey in the form of pictures and videos. There are people that just do this to record videos and YouTubes and whatnot. Our experience was that we were more focused on getting safely through the experience and internalizing as much of it as we could and making sure we stayed healthy through this. And so I don't have too many pictures of the Barranco Wall. My guy did capture a couple on his phone, which I'll share here. But honestly, it was just a matter of focusing, listening, and trying to get through it. And this is where your inner motivation really comes to play, where it's going to be mind over matter, telling yourself you can do this, focusing on the actual journey and experience, trying to keep safe throughout it and listening to the guides. You also need gloves, so make sure you have a pair of hiking gloves in addition to the gloves that you will need on summit night. Make sure you have a good pair of hiking gloves. We used hiking poles. I forgot to mention, I'll mention here, I got my hiking poles in Moshi. I did not bring them from Canada. They're easily available everywhere else over there. So again, I will have links to the operator that helped get me all this stuff in Moshi. And your company will also know people in Moshi that can get you some of these things. So after navigating the Barranco Wall, you go through some valleys which are beautiful, beautiful. Through these valleys, you see some interesting vegetation. Again, you're in the moorland. So that was just a quick note on the Barranco Wall on the way to the next camp, which is called the Karanga Camp. And you're now at an elevation of 3995 meters, and you are now in what's called the Alpine Desert, which is the next level of vegetation on Kilimanjaro. So we got to the Karanga Camp. Again, the usual time that we got to all the camps, around 2-3 o'clock. Some days are longer than others. This is the first time that I actually noticed that my oxygen levels were low. So on my Apple Watch Ultra, able to get my oxygen saturation. And it was at the Karanga camp that I noticed I was a little hypoxic at 88%. My lowest oxygen saturation on the mountain was 80%. And I brought this to the attention of my guides, and they were monitoring my oxygen levels at this camp. Also from this camp, you get a beautiful view of Mount Meru, especially in the evening, and you can also see quite clearly the summit, although sometimes Kilimanjaro hides its summit in the evenings. But if the clouds clear and the sun comes out at the right time, you can not only see the summit, you can also get a great view of Meru. You can see the town of Moshi at the bottom from Karanga Camp. It's pretty cold at Karanga Camp. One good thing at Karanga Camp was that we did get some good signal for our cards, especially the Tigo card seemed to work very well at the Karanga Camp. And that's sort of all about the Karanga Camp. The evening routine remains the same. So at Karanga Camp, we had our dinner and then reorganized the gear. The nights are cold, so a camp jacket would be a good idea, along with your fleece top that I set aside. Again, you sleep through the nights as you're very exhausted, and the next day you're ready to go. As you can see, for this part, I wore my Helly Hansen, so my warmer jacket. This is a great jacket. I highly recommend it. It was good till the summit night when I needed my down jacket. But for the last few days trekking, this was a great jacket that we bought. And then we began our journey again. This journey to Barafu Camp, which is base camp, is quite challenging as well. It's through some very rocky areas, but by no means is it impossible. Even I, as an amateur, could do the journey. You do climb some pretty steep sections. It does get a little bit cool. It's very windy. You see the summit very clearly. And we were at Barafu Camp, believe it or not, at 12:30 p.m. We arrived at Barafu Camp, which is our base camp. So it was a very short hike from Karanga to Barafu. Barafu is at an elevation of 4673. It was very windy, it was very cold, but it was also intermittently sunny, and so that was a good little hike. So we've talked about Shira and Kibo, which is the summit, but now we start to see the other peak of Kilimanjaro, the Mwenzi, and Mwenzi is a mythical peak of Kilimanjaro. It has multiple mythical stories around it. It's the peak of Kilimanjaro that you see only at the end of the trip, coming towards Barafu, and then from the summit. When you summit, you get great views of Mwenzi. It is said that Mwenzi hides behind clouds until you're at the point where you are actually going to the summit, and that's where you need Mwenzi to bless you. Mwenzi is a mountain of its own, although it's part of Kilimanjaro. Very few people have attempted Mwenzi, but it has been climbed by experienced mountaineers, and you can look up those mountaineers. It's a treacherous hike. It is quite challenging and very rugged, but people have done it. That wasn't going to be us. You get great views of Mwenzi on the last few days. So what happens at Barafu camp is that you get fed very well. You start to meet people who have summited and are coming down, and unfortunately you also see people that do not summit. On these last days you also start seeing the helicopter. So the helicopter will airlift people. On our descent we actually ran into a person getting airlifted. I'll share that picture when we get there. But you start seeing the helicopter coming up. There's helipads around all these camps. You don't see them very much in the lower camps, although I think we did see one. But on the higher levels, the helicopter's pretty busy going up and down, taking people away who could not summit. It's also used by people who do summit, but don't want to come down. They can call the helicopter. So it doesn't mean that if you see the helicopter taking people off the mountain, it doesn't mean that those people did not summit. Some people did summit and then asked to be airlifted. If there is a medical reason for being airlifted, it costs about $2,000 US. If you're just getting airlifted because you don't want to come all the way down after summiting, then it can cost a lot more. Most insurance plans will pay for it, and so I used World Nomads. This is one of the insurance plans that includes airlifting, although you do have to specify that when you buy the policy, and you have to specify that you will be climbing to that altitude. So make sure that if you get World Nomads, you specify those details. It cost 185 Canadian dollars, so it was not by any means too expensive considering how much money you're spending on the trip. So on that last day at Barafu camp, which is base camp, there's a lot of emphasis on hydrating, resting. We've reached the camp at 12:30 p.m., so there's lots of time for that. And eating some vegetables, eating warm foods to kind of get your warmth up. So we were served vegetable stew. Going to the bathroom, been to the bathroom a few times, because once you summit, then you want all those bodily functions to be working according to a predictable plan, as there's no bathrooms up on the summit. So we used the afternoon and evening to do all those things. We had our usual health check. My oxygen saturation just before summit night was 86, which was good enough for me to proceed on to summit night. So from Barafu camp, you will be summiting. Once you've looked after all these things, they do ask you to go to sleep with the intention of waking you up around 10 or 11 p.m. to begin summiting. Your dinner's done by 5 p.m. that day. And then they wake you up. And this is where you get all your summit gear. So for the summit night, what I had was a down jacket. By no means did I buy an expensive one. I ended up giving it away to the porters because, again, one thing you'll find is that the porters don't have the best gear. So anything that you bring from Europe or North America will be better than what they have. So if there's anything that you don't see yourself using, just give it to the porters. For summit night, I had my down jacket, which was by no means an expensive one. It was just a regular one. I had my thermal layers, which were both fleece for my top and bottom. I had 2 layers of socks. I had thick mountain socks. Under those, I had a layer of regular hiking socks. I had my mountain gloves, which were like ski gloves. And under that, I had a layer of hand gloves, just normal hand gloves. I had 3 or 4 layers at the top. So I had my thermal, I had a short sleeve, long sleeve on top of that, a fleece hoodie, and then a down jacket. So it was 4 or 5 layers. For my legs, I had my thermal layer. I had my fleece pants, my hiking pants that were fleece inside. So what I did not mention is that I started my first couple of days just wearing joggers. For the next couple of days, I wore hiking pants, just normal hiking pants. And for the last summit night, I wore fleece pants with fleece thermals inside. So 2 layers for my legs, 4 or 5 layers for my top. And then I had 2 toques. And then I would throw my hood on whenever it got too cold, and 2 layers of socks. And that was it. And I found that was too warm, so we had to remove 1 layer once we got to the top. Once they wake you up, basically you get ready, you put your layers on, they make sure you're okay. You have water in your day pack. All you're going to carry is your camelback. Your day pack should otherwise be empty other than a few snacks, because when you descend, you're going to take some of those layers off and put them in your day pack. So you're not going to be carrying a lot in your day pack. I did not take a lot of pictures of the actual summit night until we got to the top. And even when we got to the top, I did not take a lot of pictures because there's a lot of adrenaline, there's a lot of excitement, there's different emotions going through you. Your mind is focused on the trip itself. For the summit part, it's very dark. They wake you up around 10 or 11 o'clock. You have a little bit of tea, maybe a couple of snacks, and you start hiking. It's a long hike. It's very dark. This is where you need a good headlamp. So there are many headlamps available on Amazon. I'll post a link to the one I got. And this particular headlamp uses long lithium batteries. So I actually found a flashlight that actually used the same batteries as my headlamp. And so with the flashlight, we got 4 batteries. With the headlamp, we got 4 batteries. So we actually had 8 batteries altogether. And I made sure I had those batteries with me. I did have the flashlight as well in my day pack in case the headlamp failed. The headlamp was probably the best thing I used on summit night. I did not consume a lot of snacks. I had taken some energy bars. I had taken some caffeine candy. I did not use any of that. The one thing that I found useful was some chocolate that the guides had brought. And just that sugar was very useful to getting us through. We took regular stops. We were slow, especially because I was an amateur. The one thing we noticed on summit night is that if you layer up too much, it's not good. You start getting hot and your hands become very uncomfortable. So we started to notice that our hands were going numb and we're getting maybe a little uncomfortable. It was not actually that they were hypothermic, it was actually because we had too many layers on. So when we started feeling that way, the guide said, you know what, just take off a layer and see if this goes away. And we did that and we felt a lot better. So it was actually your body telling you that you have too many layers on. You may mistake that for hypothermia, but you can't get hypothermia if you have that many layers on. And your body can't tell you that it's very hot because it's so cold outside. It's just a matter of being too wrapped up. And we took a layer off and put it in our day packs, and that sensation went away. So summit night, you're going through the dark, you're looking at the stars, you're looking at Moshi down below you. You can't see the summit at all you can see is the ground that's ahead of you. Unfortunately, you see people getting sick and coming down, and that's a little demoralizing. That happened at Barafu camp as well. But for us, we just kind of did it slow. There were groups that were going ahead of us. We let them go ahead of us. We took some stops along the way where we found rocks to just sit on. The goal was to get to the summit for sunrise. We were a little bit late, but not a lot. As the sun comes out, you start seeing amazing views of Moenzi, which was sort of my desire, was to see Moenzi. I had not seen Moenzi, and Moenzi is a beautiful peak of Kilimanjaro. And gradually, as you get to the top, the first thing that you notice are the radio aerials that are present at the top, probably to communicate with the air transportation for people that get sick. There's also Wi-Fi that now becomes available. You do have to pay for it. But you start to see those aerials, those towers, radio towers, and our guides told us that's pretty much the top. That's Stella's Point, which is the first stop as you get to the summit. It's not the summit. The summit is Uhuru Peak. But we used that as our landmark, and we kind of zigzagged around a whole bunch of rock formations, going through some rocky areas. And once the sun comes out, it actually gives you an added boost of energy. So the sunrise was around 5 or 5:30 or something like that. Once the sun rose, we had the energy to keep going. Until that point, we were kind of doubtful as to whether we would summit or not. But once the sun came out, we got these amazing pictures of Moenzi, and we're like, okay, we're making it to the top. And we kept moving. We did not stop at Stella's Point. We went straight for Uhuru Peak, which is 45 minutes from Stella Point. And once you're at Stella Point, you're going to make it to Uhuru Peak. We had a little bit of chocolate at Stella Point, and we said we would save the rest for our descent. But we did not really do much at Stella Point. We went straight to Uhuru Peak. Our arrival at Uhuru Peak was at around 7 a.m. So we were at Stella Point earlier. We did not stop there. We went straight to the Uhuru Peak. We spent some time there. We actually saw some cool people summiting, including some famous Tanzanian personalities. And then we spent a little bit of time there. It was actually very snowy the day we went there. And the weather was not very cooperative. There was a lot of snow. It was a little bit of a stormy day. So the priority was to decide how much time we wanted to spend there and to make our way down as soon as possible before conditions got too rough. And so we did not spend a lot of time at the summit. We were, of course, very, very thrilled to have made it to the top. We were there for a few minutes, and then, as I said, the weather was a little bit dicey, so we had to get out of there. On the way back, we did make a stop at Stella's Point. and we looked at the various glaciers, the north and south glaciers. We took some pictures from the top. At this point, I just had my phone. My camera was, I didn't bring it on in my day pack. Either camera, the small one or the big one, it just adds weight and it's very difficult. So just count on your phone. Thankfully, my phone was charged. My water started to freeze in the camelback. Thankfully, I had my water bottle. It was certified to not have freezing effects at that temperature, so my water bottle stayed quite unfrozen. And having the electrolytes in it, I think somehow prevents that freezing from happening. So the water in the camelback was frozen, but we had water in the day pack. From there, we of course had to think about descending from the mountain. Now, once you've summited, it's not the end of the journey. There's a whole aspect of descent that people need to be aware of because the descent is pretty rough. On descending the mountain, you have to get back to Barafu camp, but they want you off the mountain once you've summited. And so you have to go from Barafu camp to your last camp, which is on the way down. It's called Mueca camp. You have to do that on the same day, which I think was exhausting. It was hard. It was harder than summit night because you've just summited. So that part of the journey is actually, I think, more difficult than anything you have accomplished so far. So in beginning the descent, you're now going down along the scree, which is this sandy rock configuration, very steep, very slippery. You actually slide down this rock at times like you're going down ice. And what we did is we ended up holding hands and making a little daisy chain. Our junior guides had to help as well as our senior guides. And we kind of held each other's hands down through these very slippery areas. It's a very steep descent with these scree-type rock formations. You're sliding down. And they actually taught us a technique to do this safely. As to how we put our feet down that scree rock because it's very, very slippery. And it took us a little bit of while to get down, but we did, and we hiked down these rocky areas, holding hands. We ran into John here as well. He summited as well, and we came back to base camp. When we came back to base camp, Barafu, where we had started before summiting, we got great views of Moenzi, which was sort of my dream, was to see Moenzi, because I've always had great respect for Moenzi. Although the target was to get to Kibo, Moenzi is a beautiful mountain formation and one of the peaks of Kilimanjaro. Once we got to Barafu, we were done. We had summited, we had gotten all this stuff accomplished, we had descended through the scree. But when we got to Barafu, we were given the news that we had to actually be at Mueca camp because they wanted us off the mountain. Once you've summited, so others can come through. It's sort of, some people go up and then others go down. And so we had to be at Mueca camp. So we were back at Barafu by 10:30 in the morning. And we had to hike to Mueca camp, and we had to be there by sunset for dinner. And I found that was the hardest part because you've summited, you've descended, and now you're done and you just want to sleep. So we did actually complain to the guides and we said, like, this is too much for a day. So they allowed us some time to nap. and we got a little bit of a nap in there. We did eat. We were hungry, so we did eat. But they at that point said we have to go because it's about a 4 to 5 hour hike to get to Mweka camp, which is your last camp on the way out. So we left Barafu camp again at around 1 o'clock. We got a little bit of a nap in there. Um, so maybe from 11 to 12:45, and then we got up and we were ready to go again. Our stuff was all packed. We didn't really unpack. We didn't really change. We wore the same clothes we had worn for the summit. We just took some layers off. And then we proceeded to Mweka. This took us through some pretty rocky terrain, probably the worst terrain that we've seen. It was very rocky. It was mostly descent as well. It was a little bit slippery, and it was tough to navigate some of those areas. But ultimately, we made it to the last camp, which was the Mweka camp, and that's at an elevation of 3,100 meters. And this was the last camp. So again, we were there by 6 p.m. As that was our target. We met our target. It was cold, so I wore my Helly Hansen for that last part. I took some layers off though um, from the earlier climb, and again reorganized my gear. One thing that I did appreciate having, which was my nighttime companion, because the nights get pretty lonely, is this camp light. It was a cool camp light I bought at MEC. I kept it on all night sometimes, turned it off here and there in my tent. It was my little companion. Sometimes I would talk to it. People thought I'm crazy, but you need something that you can attach to because it does get very lonely. And it gave out a good light, sometimes a blue light. It was probably the best thing that I took. The other thing that I really found useful were hand warmers. I put them in my gloves for summit night, but I found another use for hand warmers. I put them in my sleeping bag every night. So once they got activated, I put 2 or 3 in my sleeping bag, and it kept my sleeping bag warm. The other thing I put in my sleeping bag was a hot water bottle that I got at Moshi. I put it inside my sleeping bag. Now, I did use a sleeping bag liner. My sleeping bag I got from Moshi. The hot water bottle I got from Moshi, but I bought the sleeping bag liner here in Canada, and I used that to cover myself inside the sleeping bag. Put a couple of these hand warmers in there, rub them in to activate them, and then they kept the sleeping bag warm. And then this little light was really useful. I had the little iPad mini with some videos and some books because the nights, evenings sometimes get a little dull, and if you have something to read on your little iPad, the iPad mini was not heavy by any means, and it had all my books, it had a few videos I downloaded on Netflix just to watch on the journey. Mweka camp was sort of the last time that we would see all our porters, as they would be ahead of us when we descended and would then part ways with us. So we did some bonding at Mweka camp with the porters, both the evening of arrival there and the day after. And then from Mweka camp, the next day is when we exit from the mountain, and we have about a 10 to 12 kilometer hike to the gate where they pick you up to take you back to the lodge. You get great views of the summit that you were just on. You descend from Mweka camp to Mweka gate. As you descend, you go back into the tropical rainforest. Unfortunately for us, though, it rained, and the exit of the mountain became very treacherous as the tropical rainforest gets very muddy. The terrain is very rocky and it gets very slippery, and you can imagine descending through slippery rock and mud in a tropical rainforest. So I found the descent very, very difficult because of the scree, because of how much you have to cover, because of the fact that after summiting and coming back to base camp, you're then mobilized again to go out through Mecca camp and to be at Mecca camp to leave the next day. So the descent was quite exhausting. So you reach Mecca camp, you go to bed, the next day you wake up, and then you hike the 12 kilometers to the exit gate where you get picked up. That last part is again through tropical rainforest. So if you want, you can put your joggers back on and a t-shirt. It gets pretty warm through this section. It can rain again, so make sure that at this point you have the rain jacket. And again, now it's just a long, long hike to the exit through these muddy routes. And the rain didn't help at that point. When you get to the exit, you will be greeted by your drivers that will take you back. But at the exit is also the office where they take your details to give you your certificate saying that you've successfully climbed the mountain. Your guides will organize a ceremony, or most guides will, where they'll give you the certificate. Whoever of the crew is still around may come out to award that certificate. At this point, it's important to know when you'll be seeing the whole crew again, because they start to disperse very quickly, and it is kind of expected that you will give out some tips to the crew. So check with your guides and your organizers as to when the crew will be dispersing. We decided to give our tips at the Mueca camp before we left for the last little trek, because we were told that our crew would disperse from the Mueca gate, which is the gate where the cars pick you up. And so we decided to give the tips out at the Mueca camp. But some people chose to wait till the end if their group or their crew was going to be with them till the end. Ours wasn't, so we decided to give them their tips. With respect to the tips that you give the crew, it is something that is standardized. Typically, most European or North American mountain climbers will give their guides maybe $100 each as a tip, and then the rest of the crew anywhere from $40 to $60 each as a tip. So please include that in your calculations, because that's the expected amount. If you feel you want to give a little bit more, we decided to, because especially our assistant guides, they did a lot for us. And then at different points, our guides also carried some of our equipment, some of our gear that they're not expected to carry, because we had some challenges at certain points. So for a few sections, they just took our stuff and said, get through this tough part. That's not something they're expected to do. So we decided to give them a little bit more. But those are the standard amounts. So if you have a crew of, say, 12 people, just budget for that, and then divide it amongst the number of participants. So for us, my friend and I calculated what it came to and then divided it by 2. In general, a porter might get about $40, a guide would get about 100, a cook might get 60, the bathroom attendants would probably get 40. So just make sure that you calculate that amount and then divide by 2, and split it with your friend. If there's more, then obviously divide it by that number. So at the exit point, which is the Mueca Gate. From Mueca Camp to Mueca Gate, it's about 4 to 5 hour hike. It's 12 kilometers. They say it's 10, but I use my Apple Watch. It's 12. It can be rough, it can be tiring, it can be hard, um, but it's totally doable. By no means is it technical. At that point, when you get to that exit, um, they actually greet you there. The rangers will greet you. There's an office that you go to input all your information. One thing to realize also is that for that last stretch, if you're struggling, they can send these Land Rovers to come and get you. So we met an amazing guide that had a crew of her on. She was a woman guide. Her name was Farida, and she was helping us, and we were helping her. But her crew, unfortunately, could not do that last walk. And so they did send these Land Rovers to get her crew. And I will attach a link to her Facebook as well. Some people prefer a female guide, and she was amazing. She had a lot of clients as well. Um, these trips can be arranged by just contacting the guides. If you kind of want to do it more as a DIY, you don't want to go through an operator or a company, you can just contact the guides and then just book your flight, and the guides meet you and take you up. Um, if that's the way you want to do it, you'll save a lot of money. The guides will figure out food and stuff. But obviously, having the luxury of a company is very advantageous because they kind of do it all for you. But it's very expensive. So this whole expedition cost us about 2,500 US dollars each. In addition to that, we had to give the tips out. So and buy a few things here and there. So you're looking at 3,000 US dollars to do a custom trip like this. At the exit gate, obviously there's restaurants, cafeterias. We got a few drinks. There's some great souvenir shops. When you leave the area, there's another souvenir shop that everyone goes to pick up a T-shirt that says "I did Kilimanjaro" or whatever. There is also these amazing people that wash your shoes for you for like 5 US dollars, and I thought that was great money, well spent. My hiking boots look so clean now. I've not used them since Kilimanjaro. Um, like I said, your guides will arrange a certificate awarding ceremony for you. And they did this for us at our lodge. So they came back to our lodge. And then what we did is we got as many of the crew as were available to come back to the lodge. And we had dinner with them, which wasn't a lot of money, but they had a great time. We paid for it. And that was our way of saying thank you, because without this crew, we really could not have done the whole trip. Um, and these guides were amazing. I mean, um, we did a little interview with them, which I will attach a link to. The interview is in Swahili, but they basically say that, they've done this trip so many times. And in Swahili, there's a word called jukumu, which means responsibility to care for somebody. And they say they take this as their responsibility. Anyways, we got our certificates, and one of our guides took me out to Moshi to get a haircut, and showed me around the whole town, the markets and everything else. We had a great dinner, like I said, and not all the crew could come out, but most of the crew did. It was amazing. It was great. We had an amazing time. And I think a lot of it was because of the research we did, the gear we had, and the company we chose. At the end, it was so nice. I wish I took more pictures, but again, it was mostly focused on the technical part. And, there was not much opportunity for the rest. I hope this video is helpful for anybody that wants to climb Kilimanjaro as an amateur. It's doable. It's a little bit tough at times, but by no means is it impossible. The main thing is to listen to your guides, to do a little bit of research, to be aware of all the possibilities that can happen, to be aware of the elements, to have the right clothing, to take some supplements, to take Diamox. I thought it was very useful. To have ibuprofen as needed, to stay hydrated, to be aware of when to use the bathroom so you're not needing it sporadically, to keep your bowel function regular. Fiber really helps. To get that bathroom, portable bathroom, that was a big plus. To work with the guides, to find a company and a crew and guides that are compatible with what you want to do and to help you get it done, and to work with a company that knows your abilities and your limitations, and so they can work with you as well to get this done. So this was my trip. Please contact me if you have any questions. The gear I used, let me know if anybody wants to know where I bought it or where I found it. Certainly you can contact me for that information, but I hope this video was useful. Thank you for watching our video, and please press like if you enjoyed watching this. Thanks.
Mwanaume bomba bomba bomba, mashefu bomba bomba bomba, magaidi bomba bomba bomba, wagumu bomba bomba bomba. Sema usiseme, usimshike mwanaume usimshike. 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 Kilimanjaro bomba bomba bomba, Oneka bomba bomba bomba, Mawenzi bomba bomba bomba, Uhuru bomba bomba bomba. Sema usiseme, usimshike mwanaume usimshike. Sema usiseme, usimshike mwanaume usimshike.